See if I got all that done correctly. As has been said, tonight we're going to be studying over Habakkuk. When putting together this study, it was suggested that there be three things that we present. Who is the prophet? When did he prophesy? And then we were to summarize his message. So who is Habakkuk? The answer to this is both simple and difficult. It's difficult because it took a lot of study to figure out who he was. And it's really simple because the answers we don't know. The International Bible Encyclopedia says practically nothing is known of Habakkuk. Easton's Bible Dictionary says of his personal history we have no reliable information. Strong's lexicon tells us that his name means to embrace, so Habakkuk is often referred to as the embracer. And according to Habakkuk 1 verse 1, he is a prophet. Since we're going to be looking over the minor prophets for these next few studies, I think it's important for us to understand what a prophet is, so I'd like to define that real quick. A prophet was a spokesman for God. He spoke in God's name and by his authority. He is the mouth by which God speaks to men, so therefore what the prophet says is not of man, but of God. When did Habakkuk prophesy? It's thought that he prophesied between 626 BC and 605 BC. According to Habakkuk 1 verse 5, God had told Habakkuk that to watch and be amazed by the heathens because something marvelous was going to happen. Because of that, some scholars actually think that Habakkuk prophesied a little bit earlier on, maybe around 640 BC or before that. What we do know is that he prophesied before the Babylonian captivity. I believe that the time that he prophesied, I'm going to narrow it down between 609 BC and 605 BC. I could be wrong in this, but I'm going to let you know later how I got to this and why I believe that. The setting. To understand exactly why Habakkuk is saying what he's saying, I think we need to have some type of setting, and the only way that I could figure out to do that was to look at several kings that had reigned. So first of all, I want to start with King Manasseh. Manasseh reigned as king over Judah from 697 BC to 642 BC. According to the scriptures, Manasseh was an evil man. And for the sake of time tonight, I'm going to be putting a lot of scriptures up on the board, but I'm only going to be paraphrasing them because we don't have time to read them all. But according to 2 Kings 21 verse 9, Manasseh seduced Judah to do more evil than the nations around them. So Manasseh was more evil than those that didn't even know God. According to verse 11, he did wickedly above all the Amorites. So the Amorites were also nations around them. He was even more wicked than them. And he made Judah to sin with his idols. Idols that he had created, idols that he was worshiping. He also got Judah, or God's people, to worship them. After Manasseh's reign, one more verse, verse 16. It says, Manasseh shed innocent blood, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. After Manasseh's reign, Ammon, his son, became king over Judah, and he reigned from approximately 642 BC to 640 BC. According to the scriptures, he also was an evil man, just like his father. 2 Chronicles 33 and verse 22 says, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. He sacrificed unto all the carved images that his father Manasseh had made, and he served them. According to verse 23, Ammon did not humble himself before God, and he trespassed more and more. He was even more wicked and evil than his father was. After Manasseh, his son Josiah became king at the young age of 8. He reigned as king over Judah from approximately 640 BC to 609 BC. The events of Josiah's reign can be found in 2 Kings chapter 22 and 23. Josiah was different than his father and his grandfather, though. He did not do evil in the eyes of the Lord. 2 Kings 22 and 2 says he did right in the eyes of the Lord. So now we've had a change. We've got a good king that has risen up, and he is righteous. 2 Kings 23 and 4 says, he removed from the temple of the Lord all the articles made for Baal and Asherah and all the starry host. Verse 5 says he did away with the pagan priests. Verse 6 says he took the Asherah poles from the temple of the Lord and he burned them. Verse 20 says he tore down the quarters of the male shrine prostitutes. That's verse 7. Verse 20, Josiah slaughtered all the priests of those high places. So what Josiah did was he took everything out of the temple of the Lord, because Manasseh and Ammon, they had set up idols in there, and they had set altars up in there, and they were worshiping these things. They were not worshiping God anymore, and Josiah did away with all that. He cleaned house in the temple, and he restored temple worship. He had an open reading of the law, and even those priests that were sacrificing to all these idols, these pagan gods, he had them killed. After Josiah's death, his son Jehoahaz reigned as king over Judah from 609 BC to 609 BC. That's not a typo. He reigned for 3 months. The scriptures tell us in 2 Kings 23 verse 32, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. You see, while Josiah had restored temple worship, he had gotten rid of all those idols. One thing that Josiah wasn't able to do was get rid of the idols of the heart. He couldn't get rid of the evil and the wickedness that was in men's hearts. And even his son rose up and was evil. After he was removed to Riblah, his brother Jehoiakim became king over Judah, and he reigned from 609 BC to 598 BC. 2 Chronicles 36 and 5 tells us that he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Jehoiakim was an evil man. According to 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, there's really not a lot of the evils recorded that he did, but Jeremiah tells us something about him that helps us know just exactly how evil he was. Jeremiah 22 and 19 says, he shall be buried with the burial of an ass, drawn and cast forth beyond the gates of Jerusalem. Jeremiah is talking about Jehoiakim here. This king, whenever he died, he wasn't buried in a sepulcher, wasn't buried in a tomb, wasn't buried in a cave. He didn't even receive a poor man's burial. He received the burial of a farm animal, drug outside, and left for the vultures, the coyotes, the wolves to come in and feast on his body. I think it was during the end of Josiah's reign or the beginning of Jehoiakim's reign whenever Habakkuk is actually prophesying. Once again, I'm going to explain this a little bit more in detail later. So the message of Habakkuk. Habakkuk 1 verse 1 says, the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. The scriptures tell us that what Habakkuk saw was a burden to him. It was heavy. It was hard for him to look at. Now Habakkuk, the way he prophesies, it's a little bit different the way than the way that other prophets do. Usually God would tell a prophet something, that prophet would tell the people that thing, the people would tell the prophet something, and the prophet would tell God that, and it went back and forth like that. But with this, Habakkuk starts the conversation, and he says something to God, and then God answers him back, and they go back and forth, and then eventually Habakkuk would relay it to the people. As we get started here, I want you to know that my slides have been color-coded. Habakkuk is in what I've been told is blue, and God is in what I've been told is green. I say I've been told this because I'm colorblind. I tried to pick out a couple of slides that I didn't think looked too crazy and would hurt our eyes, and I asked Jasandra if they were okay. She tweaked the colors a little bit, so if it's not, you let her know. So if you happen to get lost a little bit in this and you wonder, is this God talking or is this Habakkuk? Hopefully you can remember, if it's in blue, it was Habakkuk. If it's in green, it was God. Habakkuk 1, verse 2 through 4. He says, O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee violence, and thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slack, the judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. Before we look closer at this list of complaints that Habakkuk just presented to God, I'd like to look at something that was prophesied by Jeremiah. Because as we can see, Habakkuk's not happy. He's asking God, how long do I got to look at this? So what we need to know is, what's he looking at? Well, God through Jeremiah gives us some of that information. Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 2 through 6, God tells Jeremiah, these people are adulterers. everybody's sleeping with everybody's spouses. He says they're an unfaithful people. They're even cheating on me. He says they make ready their tongue like a bow to shoot lies. Everything that comes out of the mouth of these people is nothing but lies. He says they go from one sin to another. They don't ever stop sinning, just from one sin to another. And then God says, they don't acknowledge me. They act like I don't even exist and that I am not God. He says every brother is a deceiver, every friend is a slanderer. He says you can't trust anybody. Everybody's got a hidden agenda. They got a secret motive. You can't even trust your best friend. You can't even trust your own blood, your own brother. He says no one speaks truth. They've taught their tongues to lie, and they weary themselves with sinning. They literally sin so much that they're tired. God says you live in the midst of deception. Now let's go back to Habakkuk's complaints. Habakkuk asked God, how long must I call for help, but you do not listen? That was his complaint. Habakkuk was frustrated, irritated. He was angry, and he told God. He says, how long, God? How long do I got to do this? I keep on crying out to you. I keep on praying to you, but you don't listen. How long do I have to do this for? Then he says, you don't come to the rescue even though there's violence. He says, people are getting hurt. People are getting harmed. There's bloodshed, and you still don't come. Habakkuk's not happy. He says, why do you make me look at iniquity? God, why do you make me look on all this sin around me? Why do you cause me to look on wickedness? Not just sin, but pure evil. And he blames God. He says, why do you cause me to do that? And then he says, the law is ignored and justice is never upheld. So here he says basically the same thing that God said through Jeremiah. People don't even acknowledge you, God. They don't act like you exist. They completely ignore your law, and justice is never upheld. He said people are doing all these evil things, and they never have to pay a price for it. There's no punishment for them. They just keep on and keep on. The question that Habakkuk presented to God was, God, why do you tolerate evil? Why? This was not a new question. It had been asked before. Job asked it in chapter 21, verse 7. David asked it in Psalms 94 and 3. Jeremiah asked it in chapter 12, verse 1. We can see this question wasn't new. It's been asked before. It's been asked for centuries, and we still ask it today. God, why do you tolerate evil? Why do the wicked prosper whenever the good live in misery? Why do the rich get richer and I don't get a promotion? I don't get a raise? Why are the wicked so healthy, yet I'm sick? I've got all these physical ailments. God, why did Charlie Kirk have to die? Why? God, why do you tolerate evil? It's been asked for years, and it's continued to be asked. But God answers Habakkuk's question. Evidently, whenever Habakkuk says, how long do I got to cry out? The answer was, not much longer. I'm going to answer you. And here's God's response. He says, behold you among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days which you will not believe, though it be told you. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march forth through the breadth of the land, and to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. God's response here, He says, look at the heathens and watch. Be utterly amazed. The heathens here can be translated as nations or foreign nations, the surrounding countries, anybody other than the Jews, anybody that wasn't God's chosen people. God tells them, I'm going to do something. I've got a plan. I've got something up my sleeve. Something's going to happen that you have no clue about. God says, I got something in the works. Then He gives a little bit more detail. He says, I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. He says, I'm raising up the Chaldeans. Now, this is why I think the time frame of Habakkuk prophesied was at the beginning of Jehoiakim's reign. If it was in Manasseh's reign, God raised up Josiah as a good, righteous king. That was nothing new. But now, at the end of Josiah's reign, people start turning evil again. At the beginning of Jehoiakim's reign, they're really evil. So it kind of makes sense that it is in that time frame right there. And also a few years into Jehoiakim's reign is whenever the Babylonians come in and invade. So I believe it was during this Babylonian invasion, or just before it, with Jehoiakim as king. So some translations, instead of saying, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, actually say the Babylonians. So I'd like to take just a minute and look at why maybe it might say the Chaldeans and why it might say the Babylonians. So you can see this map here. So we have Babylonia. So that's the state of Babylonia, or the empire of Babylonia. Usually we just call it the Babylonian Empire. But right here we have Babylon and we have Chaldee. Both of those are cities within Babylonia. So you can see it's all the Babylonian Empire. So either translation would be correct. Either the Babylonians or the Chaldeans. I think whenever he says the Chaldeans, he's stating the specific region that the people are going to come from to invade Judah. And Judah is down here. This is where Jehoiakim is reigning. This is where Habakkuk is prophesying from. God continues on with his response in verse 8. He says, the horses of the Babylonians are swifter than leopards. Can you imagine that? A horse that fast? I've had several horses. None of them were near that fast. They were just regular horses. But he says these horses are as fast as leopards. So if you had an army, you're part of Judah's army, and you learn that the army that's coming against you has got horses as fast as leopards, you're going to be scared. Not only that, but he says these horses are like evening wolves. They're out on the prowl. They're looking to devour something. So these horses, whenever they went into the battle, they were fierce. They weren't scared. It didn't matter if men were launching arrows at them. They were still going to keep running in. It didn't matter if a man was sitting there with his shield and with his sword pulled. Those horses would continue to go in. Even the horses of the Babylonians was to be feared. He says they all come for violence. The Babylonians were evil, ruthless. They thrived on violence. They loved bloodshed. Human life meant nothing to them. They showed no mercy. They scoffed at kings. They didn't even show kings mercy. They would subdue them. They would wipe out entire cities. They would destroy temples, and they would take anything they wanted. The Babylonians were a ruthless people. Whenever he says, for behold, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, that word hasty actually means fluid. They would flow like water. So imagine a dam, and now it's been breached. And you've got this massive amount of water going forth, wiping out everything in its way. He says that's the Babylonians. They're hasty, they're fluid, they're going to take out everything. So we looked at all these complaints that Habakkuk had brought before God. He wanted to know how long God was going to tolerate Judah's wickedness. How long God would tolerate the idolatry, the injustice, the sexual immorality, the child sacrifices. Yes. Judah, God's people, were sacrificing their children, burning them alive to pagan gods and burning them on altars. He says, how long? How long, God, are you going to tolerate the bribery, the murder, the theft, and many other sins that found themselves right at home in the hearts and the hands of the people of Judah? To sum it up in one sentence, Habakkuk says, God, why do you tolerate evil? To which God responds, don't worry, it's getting worse. He says, you think Judah's bad right now? Wait till you see the Babylonians. They're even more ruthless and evil than Judah. He says, I'm going to rise up in a nation even more evil and adulterous than Judah, and they're going to teach you a lesson. To this, Habakkuk responds in verses 12 and 13. Verse 12, Habakkuk says, art thou not from everlasting? I think this was actually more of a statement, not really a question. He was saying, God, you're not like the idols that most of Judah's been serving. You're not like the idols that the Babylonians served. They have a beginning, they have an end. They were made with man's hands. They were also crumbled by man's hands. They will decay. He says, no, Lord, you have been, you are, and you will forever be. God, you are eternal. You are everlasting. Then he states, we shall not die. Habakkuk says, God, I know no matter what's happened, you won't completely wipe your people out from the face of the earth. I know you're going to let some of us live. I know that there will be a remnant. He continues on and says, Thou hast ordained them for judgment, that's the Babylonians, and Almighty God, Thou hast established them for correction. So God gives all those details about how evil the Babylonians are, and yet He chose them to judge Judah. To Habakkuk, this made no sense. To him, this felt like injustice. Why are you doing this, God? Yet he said, I know you're raising up the Chaldeans. I know you're raising them up to correct your people, to bring them out of sin. You're doing this so that Judah will once again turn their hearts to you. In verse 13, though, it seems like Habakkuk begins to challenge God a little bit. He says, Thou art of pure eyes and to behold evil. Now this is a compliment. This is a real thing. Habakkuk says, God, your eyes are so pure they can't even look on evil. They can't behold evil. Now that's a good thing. He's not finished with his challenge. Then he says, why are you looking on them that deal treacherously? You are of pure eyes, God. You can't look on evil, so why are you looking on evil? It's all around us. But then he goes further and he says, you're holding your tongue. Habakkuk says, God, why are you being quiet? Why are you tolerating all this evil around us? Habakkuk was in turmoil and he wanted answers. He wanted the answers to the same questions that you and I find ourselves asking God today. God, why? We always want to know why. Habakkuk continues on in verses 14 through 17. Here he paints a picture. Habakkuk says, God, your people were like fish. We're like sea creatures. And the Babylonians, they're like fishermen. They're really good fishermen too. He said if they go out with a rod and a reel, they're going to catch a fish. If they dip their net in the water, they're going to catch a fish. Not only that, but they throw in their drag nets. They completely drain the sea and they don't leave behind a single living creature. That's the way he was comparing them. He says, we're the fish, we're going to be destroyed, God. Is there no mercy? And then in chapter 2, verse 1, Habakkuk says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower and will watch to see what he will say unto me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. I honestly love how Habakkuk responds. He tells God, I'm going to wait, I'm going to watch, and I'm going to listen. And he says he will put himself in a watchtower. A lot of times God's prophets are presented as being in watchtowers. Whenever you had a city, the city wall, there would be a big old tower built up above it. And there would be a watchman that would sit in this tower. And he would be able to look out over the city, but not only the city, he'd be able to look out over the land. And he would be able to see if the enemies were approaching, if they were coming to invade. And that's where Habakkuk says he's going to be. I'm going to be in that tower because I'm going to be watching. I want to see what you have to say to me, God. Habakkuk wasn't happy with God's response, but I want you to notice that he didn't shut God out. Habakkuk didn't end the conversation. He didn't think that he was holier or that he knew better than God. Can't always be said for you and I. Sometimes whenever we see evil around us, whenever we have questions, whenever we get frustrated, whenever we get upset, we cry out to God and we tell God what's on our hearts, and then we hang up the phone. We're done. We're not listening anymore. It's going to be my way. That's not the way it was with Habakkuk. He said, I'm going to wait, I'm going to watch, and I'm going to listen. But I also like that he says it appears that Habakkuk knew he was wrong in his complaint, because he says, I'll wait and see what I shall answer when I'm reproved. He says, whenever you rebuke me, God, whenever you correct me because my attitude's wrong, I don't know what I'll say. But it appears that Habakkuk knew that his attitude was not correct. God responds in Habakkuk 2, verses 2 through 4. Here God responds and he tells Habakkuk, take a tablet and write the vision on it. He says, write it big and bold, make it plain, make it clear, make it to be written so easily that people can read it and understand it. And then they can run with it and they can tell others the good news about the coming doom of their enemies and the deliverance of Judah. And then in verse 4 he says, behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him. God is stating that the Chaldeans are proud. They seek glory in themselves, and God simply states that the soul of the Chaldeans is not right within himself. He says, they're wrong. The Chaldeans are wicked, but the just shall live by faith. God's people, Judah, the ones that were continuing to seek God, the ones that were continuing to live according to God's will, he says these people, the just ones, the lawful ones, the righteous ones, the holy ones, he says they shall live by faith, or they shall continue to live by faith. It was their faith that had saved them and gotten them this far, and it was going to be their faith that continued to deliver them. The statement, the just shall live by faith, would bring the believers in Judah an immense amount of comfort during the evil they were living in and with the invasion of the Babylonians coming. This statement still brings comfort to you and I today. Paul seemed to think that we needed to be reminded of this because he quoted it several times. Romans 1 verse 16 and 17, Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. He says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. I'm not ashamed that I was baptized for the remission of my sins. I'm not ashamed of the good news. But sometimes whenever hard times come our way, we want to say, I don't know Jesus. We don't continue on in that saving faith. He says, the just shall live by faith no matter what happens. You have to continue in that faith. Galatians 3 and 11 says, but that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God, it is evident, for the just shall live by faith. Hebrews 10, 38 and 39. Now the just shall live by faith, but if any man draw back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of them that draw back unto perdition, but of them that believe to the saving of the soul. Sometimes as God's people, while we're on our walk with God, for some reason our faith begins to be a little shaky. Things come our way, we have questions, and we wonder, God, why are you tolerating this? Why is this happening? And because of that, we want to draw away from God. We want to draw back to perdition. We want to draw back to the world. We want to be slaves to sin again. But he says, we're not like those that draw back. We continue on in our faith. That faith that saved us, the just shall live by faith. After this, God reveals to Habakkuk what will eventually happen to the Babylonians. The rest of this chapter consists of 5 woes against the Babylonians, but we shouldn't think that it only speaks to them alone. These same woes that were brought against Babylon could easily be applied to Judah. In fact, they could easily be applied to any world power, or they could be applied to you and I. The first woe. Woe to the oppressors, found in chapter 2, verse 6 through 8. Here, he says, how long do you think this will go on for? The Babylonians is who he's talking to. He's like, how long do you think you can continue to live the way you are? How long do you think you can continue to oppress and extort others and nothing happen? He says, your riches are slowing you down and holding you back. Whenever I tried to figure out what was being said in this actual verse, it kind of confused me, because the King James says, he ladeth himself with thick clay. I thought that's interesting. The ASV says, he ladeth himself with pledges. The NASB says, he makes himself rich with loans. So I was wanting to know, what's the clay all about? It doesn't seem to fit. Is this a bad translation? So what's happening is the Babylonians have come in and they're ruling, or they're going to rule, and what they will do is the poor people they're going to bring and they're going to pawn their goods. And the rate that they're going to be charged, that interest rate, is going to be excessively high. Other people are going to take out pledges or take out loans, and that interest rate is going to be excessively high. So what happens? The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The rich get wealthier off the backs of the poor people. They show no mercy. It's nothing but greed and extortion. Now the clay. I'm from Texas and we had black land. I don't know if you know anything about black land, but me and some of my buddies would go out, and we were really smart. We would get stuck in our four-wheel drive trucks, And then we would start walking so that we could go find somebody else to try to get us out and get stuck. And our boots, as we walked, were about that thick. And after we took a step, they got thicker, and they got thicker, and they got thicker, and they got more layers of clay on them, to the point that you could barely pick your foot up. You could barely move. They were so heavy. The clay was slowing us down. And I think that's what God's talking about here. They amassed all these riches to themselves, but it was like thick clay. Their greed was slowing them down. It was keeping them from moving forward because they were so greedy and they were so evil. And because of this, God says, your debtors, your victims, they're going to rise up over you, and you will be plundered just like they plundered you. The second woe is a woe to evil gain. This piggybacks on the back of the first woe. Not only is there extortion and theft, there is gain by pure evil and by bloodshed. He says you commit evil thinking you will be delivered from evil. Can you imagine that? There's an evil happening to you, so you think that you can go and commit another evil and everything's going to be just fine. Evil never delivers good. He says you shed innocent blood. In these verses, he paints a picture of a bird building its nest. But its nest isn't good enough, so he plucks the feathers of other birds to go put in his bird nest and make it soft and cushy. And then he continues to pluck the feathers of those birds until they're harmed, until they're bleeding, until they die, all so that him and his family can have this nice, luxurious bird nest to live in. You shed innocent blood, all because you are evil and because of greed. He says you've caused your own ruin. The ruin of the Babylonians will be because of their own evil and their own greed. It says the stones and the timbers cry out vengeance. I believe the stones and the timbers are talking about the city walls and how all the buildings were made back then. 1 Kings 6 and 36 says he built an inner court with 3 rows of huge stone and then a row of cedar beams. So that's how they would build these buildings. Rows of cedar, rows of beams. And he's saying there's so much evil going on, there's so much wickedness, that even the stones and the timbers will cry out. I think this is a good reminder of the story of when Cain was killed by his brother Abel. Genesis 4 and 10, God said to Abel, "What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground." What did the blood of Abel cry out? It cried out justice. It cried out vengeance. The stones and the timbers will cry out vengeance, just as the blood of Abel did. But something to remember is vengeance belongs to the Lord, and he will repay. Romans 12 and 19. The third woe was a woe to vanity, found in verses 12 through 14. He said, you've built cities by bloodshed. You've established towns with injustice. This reminds me of the evil Pharaoh that rose up and knew not Joseph. And he had the children of Israel build him treasure cities, all because he was evil and greedy. It says the people labor and weary themselves for nothing. This reminds me of Solomon. Something he said in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2 and 3. Solomon says, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What does man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun? All the toil, all the work, all the labor, all the evil. What was it for? For nothing. It was vanity. It was meaningless. And this would be proved by what Isaiah would say about Babylon in Isaiah chapter 21, verse 9. The cry was, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. All the graven images of her gods he hath broken unto the ground. All this wealth, all this injustice, all the cities conquered, all the kingdoms subdued, all the lives taken, all the blood shed, for nothing. The cry would soon be, Babylon has fallen. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. The Lord is known by the judgments which he executes, especially when he is pleased to look upon proud men and humble them. And doing this, God proves himself to be God and God alone, according to Matthew Henry's commentary. The fourth woe is a woe to corruption. Verses 15 through 18, he says, you get others drunk to expose your shame. Now, this isn't just about drinking. This is about way more. People were getting other people drunk slobbering drunk, so that they could manipulate them, get them to sign a contract, maybe sign over their land, sign over their houses, maybe even make themselves servants to somebody else. He says you're getting people drunk to expose their shame, to manipulate them, to exploit them, to corrupt them. But it's not going to work. He says you will be filled with shame instead of glory. He said you're going to be the one that receives the shame because of what you're doing. And then he states there's no profit in idols. At the end of this woe, he begins to speak about idols and how man trusts in them even though they are his own creation. God said these idols, they teach lies. And by these lies, man is corrupted. That brings us to our fifth and final woe. It's a woe to idolatry. It's found in verse 19. Woe unto him that saith to the wood, awake, to the dumb stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. The final woe that is brought upon Babylon might be the worst of all the woes. This is a complete abandoning of God to a false religion and trying to replace the irreplaceable with something that can never satisfy. Today we may not have wooden idols carved by man, but we still have idols that we worship in place of God. Pleasure, wealth, materialism, these are all common idols. In fact, anything that dominates your life taking the place of God is an idol. God finishes up this series of woes with one simple yet profound statement. He says in verse 20, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Men turn to wood and rocks and they worship them because they can see them. Yet these idols, they don't see. They don't speak. They don't hear. They don't walk. They don't save, according to Psalms 115. What these Babylonians and the idolaters of today don't understand about God, according to what Moses says in Deuteronomy 32 and 31, is their rock is not as our rock. Moses says, the rock of the nations. Their idols that they worship, it's not like our rock. It's not like our God. Psalms 115 and 3, our God is in heaven and he does whatsoever he pleases. Our God is able. Psalms 11 and 4, the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold. His eyelids try the children of men. God is in his holy temple. And it says here that even his eyelids are so powerful that they try the children of men. Men are drawn to idols because they can see them. But just because we can't see our God standing before us doesn't mean that he isn't active, powerful, and mighty. We need to remember the Lord is in his holy temple. We need to remember that God is on his throne and he is still in control whenever there's chaos around us, whenever there's evil around us, whenever there's all these things going on in this world. Just like Habakkuk was crying out about, we need to remember God is on the throne. To this, Habakkuk responds, according to verse 1, with a prayer. And beginning in verse 2, we see that prayer. He says, revive thy work in the midst of the years. Habakkuk cries, Lord, bring a revival. Repair us, rebuild us, make us whole again. God, restore us. Then he says, in wrath, remember mercy. Habakkuk was saying that he knew judgment was coming. He knew the Babylonians were going to come. They were going to invade. He knew things were going to get bad, but he pleaded for God. He says, during this time of judgment, whenever all this evil around us, God, will you remember to have mercy? Then in verses 3 through 16, Habakkuk begins to paint a picture of mercy. He talks about whenever God's children were slaves in Egypt, and there was that evil Pharaoh that didn't remember Joseph. And the children of Israel were working really hard, and the Pharaoh was killing their babies, and he was literally working these people's fingers to the bones, and they cried out by reason of bondage because of all the oppression. And the Bible says that God heard their cry. And God sent Moses in the plagues. He had mercy on them. So then Moses goes to the Pharaoh, and God sends all these plagues upon the Pharaoh. Finally, the Pharaoh says, I will let your people go. And the children of Israel, they're fleeing Egypt, and they come to the Red Sea, and God parted the Red Sea, but the Pharaoh's heart had become hardened. So he sent his horsemen and his chariots after the children of Israel. And after the children of Israel had passed through the Red Sea on dry ground because God had parted it, whenever the Egyptians got there, God allowed the sea to come back over and to swallow them and kill them. God in His mercy delivered the children of Israel. And then as the children of Israel were on their way to the Canaan land, a land that God had promised them, while they were on their way, their faith would waver. Their faith would get a little bit weak now and then, and they would question God, and they would cry out, God, I don't understand. Did you just bring us out here so that we could die of thirst? Did you bring us out here to starve? I remember when we were in Egypt, we had onions. But God would deliver them. He would show mercy on them. One time at Mount Sinai, He came down in a pillar of smoke, and there was lightning and thunder, and the earth quaked, and God spoke to the children of Israel to restore their faith. And they told Moses, we don't need to hear God again. That's scary. But God in His mercy delivered them. He brought them all the way to the promised land, the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey. He subdued kingdoms before them and kings and wiped out complete nations. And then whenever they enter into the promised land, according to Joshua 10 verses 11 through 14, He made the sun stand still and He made the moon stand still, and God gave them the land. God delivered them. Habakkuk here poetically tells of God's mercy, and in this he's asking God for a revival. He's saying, Lord, we know of your works, and we know of all your marvelous deeds. Lord, we know of your mercy. Would you do it again? God, would you deliver us again? Would you have mercy on us again? Then Habakkuk switches gears. He doesn't complain. He doesn't argue with God. He doesn't ask why. Rather, Habakkuk presents a situation in verse 17. He says, although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. The situation that Habakkuk presents before God is pretty bleak. It's nothing but negativity. Without an in-depth study of this, we know things are bad. But I'd like to look just a little bit closer and break this verse down just a little bit. Habakkuk says, although the fig tree shall not blossom. Figs were one of the main sources of food during this time. They grew well in the region of Judah. They could be eaten fresh, they could be dried and preserved, and then they could be eaten later. This source of food being gone would have made life difficult for those in Judah. Although the fig tree not blossom, neither fruit be in the vines. Grapes thrived in the land of Judah. They were not only a staple in their diet, but they were vital to their economy. No grapes equaled less food and no money. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail. Olive trees grew well in the land of Judah. They were a staple in the diet and the economy. They provided oil for cooking. They provided oil for their lamps. They would burn the oil so that they could have light at night. The oil was provided for the Jewish offerings. No olives equaled less food. It equaled no light. It equaled no money. It also would have been a dark and depressing time for God's faithful children that still wanted to present sacrifices to Him. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the fields shall yield no meat. The land of Judah would cease to grow anything. There would be no grass for the sheep and cattle to graze on. There would be no wheat or grain, nothing to cook with, no way to bake bread, nothing to eat. The land would be barren. It would bring forth no life. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Whenever he says the flock will be cut off from the fold, he's talking about the sheep. There was going to be a time in which the fold of the sheep would be separated either by wolves coming in or by the Babylonian army coming in. So the flock would split off. And then they would have a smaller flock, and then it would happen again, and that flock would continue to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle until there were no sheep. No sheep meant no wool. No wool meant no money. No wool also meant no more making clothes. No more staying warm. The stalls in the barn would be empty. There would be no cows having calves. No cows having calves means no milk. There would be no future herd to sustain Judah. Everything Habakkuk was describing was nothing but desolation and destruction. Habakkuk says, Lord, I know hard times are coming. Lord, I know I will do without. God, I know that I will suffer. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Habakkuk says, even if I lose everything, I'm going to rejoice in you, Lord. He's not going to rejoice because everything's fine. He's not going to rejoice because now he understands everything that God is doing. He's going to rejoice because Habakkuk has changed. Habakkuk's complaint, God, why do you tolerate evil? It's the same thing that you and I often think today. We think that because things aren't going the way that we want them to, because we don't see God doing what we think He should do, because God is silent, we think He's doing nothing. We think God is just sitting back and tolerating the evil. But what Habakkuk didn't understand, and a lot of times what we don't understand, is that just because God is silent does not mean that God is not active. God is working on things beyond what we can even fathom. We just need to watch and wait and listen and understand that God is still on His throne. And while we're waiting, we need to strengthen our faith. Because God might be raising up the Chaldeans. A bitter and hasty nations. Things might get worse before they get better. I believe the lesson to be learned in Habakkuk is one of faith. And I'd like to note real quickly a few of those lessons that we can learn from this prophet. First of all, faith is not understanding everything. That's not what faith is. Having to understand everything and to know it all, that is not faith. But rather, faith is trusting the one who understands everything. We don't understand it all, but God does. And we need to put our faith, we need to put our trust in Him. Faith is not needing all the answers. Believe it or not, we don't need to know the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We don't need all the answers. Faith is not needing all the answers. See what I did there? We don't have to have all the answers. We're never going to have all the answers. God's got them all, and we've got to put our trust and our confidence in Him. Our faith has to lie in God because He knows what He's doing. He's got the answers, and we have to trust in Him. Faith is not everything working out the way we want, and thank God for that. I tell you what, so many times I've prayed to God. I've asked Him for things. God, I need this. God, if you'll just let me get this promotion, this business deal I'm working on, if it'll just go through, everything's going to be better. God, can you heal this person? With all these different things that I asked for, and I thank God that the answer was no. Because His ways are not my ways. His thoughts are not my thoughts. He knows so much better than I do. And I'm so thankful that I didn't get what I wanted and what I asked for because God knew better. Faith is rejoicing in God when nothing makes sense. Whenever we look around at this world and we say, God, why do you tolerate evil? Why is all this happening? Why do the rich get richer whenever I sit here and struggle? Why is all this happening? Why is my health failing? Whenever we present all these complaints to God, what we really need to do is rejoice in Him. When nothing makes sense, have joy in the God of your salvation. That's all I have.
job. I am the moderator. Is there a microphone? Top one.
You get the top
Get the top one. Very good. Thank you, Nathan. And now we're going to have about a 30-minute session of question, comments, and want to remind everyone to keep our appropriate decorum. We're still in a worship service, and this is under the rules of the worship service as revealed in the New Testament. Men speaking one at a time. And so what you'll do is if you have a question or something, I'll call on you. I'll let you use the microphone, and we want to do that. Remember, we are recording this, and it is being live streamed, as I understand. So first question, first comment.
Great.
Now, either you bamboozled everybody, answered all the questions, or
Confused them.
we're a little shy. That may be. Delmer?
It was good. I'll comment a little bit. I love your conclusion.
Thank you.
That's what faith is. Believing, trusting, even when we don't know. What God says is right, whether we understand it or not. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I was struck by your comparison, not comparison, but by the back and forth there on that what is faith, what is not faith, or what faith is not, and very, very thoughtful.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Brother Jared, you have anything?
It's okay if people don't put their hands
I
up,
know.
just so you
Okay.
know.
I was trying to come up with a question, but everything I thought of, you answered just after I thought of it, just after I wrote it down, then you said it. But again, I like, what do we learn from Habakkuk? And I think we can sympathize with him living in a world where we see evil all around us. And just like Habakkuk, judgment's coming, and it's not going to be pretty. And even for the righteous, even for the just, that's not a fun time. And but just echo what Dad said. Your conclusion was right on. The way we make it through that is trust in Him who's got the plan.
Thank you.
Brother Jesus, any questions, comments?
I just want to thank Nathan for a great presentation. I don't have questions. I just think it's an amazing work that you did. And we can see a big contrast, right? Even though it is from the Old Testament, we can see the things that apply in today's day too.
Thank you.
So do you have any wrap-ups?
Was there? I thought I saw something.
Okay. Was that a hand up?
So I know that, I'm a guest here tonight, and I just want to say thanks for a little further away. Okay. Was it too loud? Sorry. Yeah, I was very intrigued by the question. And I think for me, as I was interacting with it, I struggle with the timing. Like as I try to put myself in the story, like when we know that God's judgment is coming, and we know that it's going to get worse before it gets better. well, at what point are we in the story? Because it already feels pretty bad. You know what I mean? And how can it get much worse? And 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 I'm so struck by Habakkuk's response at the end. Like, how can he find peace in such turmoil and chaos, and to know that more is coming, and and yet he worships God, and and I that's to me that's the question, and I don't and I don't know if I have an answer for that, and personally, I see all this pain in the world, and I don't like it, and I run from it.
Yeah, if there's ever a time to draw close to God, the time is now. We don't know what's around the corner, but I think that's even part of what Hebrews was about there whenever I quoted, the just shall live by faith. It's no coincidence that chapter 11, I mean, man puts the dividers in there, but chapter 11 is the Faith Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
He's trying to increase everybody's faith, to instill their faith in them. So a lot of times whenever these hard times come around, we want to pull back. We want to draw back. That's the time whenever you've got to give God your all, because what if tomorrow is the end? We want to be on the right side of that. We need to make sure and put our faith and trust in God. He'll sustain us. He'll deliver us.
Nathan, I have a couple of questions here. Number one, a lot of times we think of prophecies as foretelling the future, and that's what we look at the prophets at, and that's what we think of them saying. Does Habakkuk have any major foretelling of the future prophecies
the
there?
Babylonians, they come and they invade.
Uh-huh.
They take Judah away into captivity for 70 years. So he was absolutely foretelling of the future. I don't think it's necessarily the future of us today, other than there are hard times coming.
So it was near future.
Yes, sir.
Near future, but not the distant future of the new covenant
Yes, sir.
type of things that we oftentimes think of.
I believe so.
Yeah. So a lot of what our use is from that is the patience and comfort of the scriptures, so that we can have hope,
Yes.
as Paul would say.
Yes. How does this apply to us? What is the takeaway? And the takeaway is we gotta grow in our faith. We gotta be strengthened in our faith. I believe that's the takeaway, and what that means to you and I today.
Because specifics may be very different, but the overall concept and the working of error and the working of God and the working of His people is pretty much the same. Is that what? That's one takeaway that I get from that.
I'd agree with that.
Any questions? Yes.
I was trying to find the verse, but I think I did. It reminded me of it's in Romans 9. It talks about the wrath and the mercy of God. One of Habakkuk's questions, why do you allow evil, God? Why do you let the evil to continuously happen? Why do good people die? The same questions we all ask. And why is there even evil people out there? Why are there evil leaders? Why was Pharaoh raised up, and so on? But in Romans 9, starting in verse 19, it says, you will then say to me, why does he yet find fault? For who can resist his will? Rather, O man, who are you to answer back to God? Shall the thing formed say to him who formed it, why have you made me like this? Does the potter not have power over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel for honor and another for dishonor? 22, what if God, willing to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much patience the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he previously prepared for glory, even us whom he has called, not for the Jews only, but also for the Gentiles. So it just made me think of how God builds up these evil people in order to eventually glorify the people who are set for, or who are created for glory, essentially. And so that's all I really have there.
I agree. You know, like Jeremiah was saying, we're in some hard times, and things are different now than they were then. But you know, in light of recent events, there was a lot of evil that we were all able to see, and because of that, there are people coming to the Lord.
Amen.
Because they saw the evil that was going around, and they knew that there was a devil. They knew that there was a hell, because this is bad. Who treats somebody like that? I think we've got a revival going on right now. God is rebuilding His people. Amen.
Any other questions, comments? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I think at this time, we're going to have our closing song and then a closing prayer.